Hey people, I filmed a little experiment yesterday of this type of Ed Leedskalnin's Perpetual motion holder, and it seems to magnetize, is what we would call it. This is like Ed's Perpetual motion holder. You can see it's off here. You see like this is the U-bolt and this is the plate. You see how they're slid off here, but the rest of it's got a good connection. And it's an example of this perpetual motion holder. And I read where somebody had made one of these and they put a 10 kilo weight, 22 pounds on it, and hung it up, and it was there in the garage like 18 years. You put a charge to it and it charges, and then it never turns loose. It's perpetual motion running until you break the circuit. Once you break it, it falls apart. So take a board that you might be able to wedge up underneath the headlight bracket or something and drill a hole in it as big as the biggest piece of wire you got. I found this 10 gauge copper the minimum it takes. A 12 gauge, you can see the nuts pull together, but it takes the minimum 10 to hold them together. What I did here, I stacked 18 nuts together to see if it would do them all the same. Leave a loop in that wire underneath at least 16 inches, I would say, so the magnetic force doesn't affect what you're doing. And you can read in Ed Leedskalnin's book of magnetics. He'll teach you some experiments to show you exactly how far away it needs to be. You can see how this current draws this. And so if you already have something magnetized and the wires close to it, it'll fall apart. The modern physics can't explain this, so if you post anything about it on any physics forums, they just remove it, call it crackpot. The way I showed how to build it is a lot easier. Anybody can do it, it's real easy, and it shows something that they can't explain. Several people had printed his book, but every one of them decided to change the cover. None of them wanted to leave it like he had it. And it was similar to this, but on the bottom it said by magnets, as in written by magnets. And like this one, where it says by Ed Leedskalnin and published by Ed Leedskalnin, he just put his name under published, but it was by magnets. By magnets is a new study, and it's hard to get any information on it, but they're used in ferrofluid. Being Ed was from Latvia, I would guess that he had read this Anton Brugman's book, 1765, where he proposed a two-fluid theory of magnetism, or bimagnetism, and he discovered the diamagnetism of bismuth. That diamagnetism, that's what they use to levitate. So if you start with this book on magnetic current, this is the best place to start with him. And you find it many places. This is the best place here at archive.org. And he's going to start by walking you through an experiment. And then in this experiment, he's teaching you the right-hand rule. But he's having you face to the east in this experiment. And so you can understand, when you put your right hand out there and grab something, the direction your thumb's pointing shows the spiral. Your fingers show the turn that goes around. So when the current's moving north, the spiral's working east. You turn your hand over, your thumb pointing south, the spiral's working west. And so he does it like this to show that just the same as it works on a magnet, the same thing's going on in the earth. And then he tells you what equipment to get and explains you how to perform these experiments, and so you can understand magnetism. And he considered magnetism the same thing as electricity. He's going to explain it all from the basics, where anybody can learn this. And he shows you how to set up several experiments so you can see for yourself what magnetism does, how it reacts. He explains what's happening. And then he starts to explain how to make this perpetual motion holder. And it's a lot more work than what I did. You have to wrap coils and put on this U-bolt. And so it's a lot simpler to show it the way I did, but it's the same principle, and it's the direction of the magnetic force around the electrical current that causes this. But instead of just running one wire through the middle, in order to make it stronger, like I say, one guy put a 20-pound weight on there and hung this in his garage and hung off of it, didn't pull loose, and he just let it hang there for 20 years till he had to move, and he found out that it was difficult to break loose, but once he broke a spot in there where it was no longer making a connection, the weight dropped easily. So the way Ed describes it is the force of magnetism doesn't come from within. The forces come from outside. And so when he cranked this handle, and all this weight, all these chains and irons, they all draw it up, like a vacuum. And he pictured this, like a vacuum bag. Picture is everything just sucking all up when he cranked that handle. And he knew the laws of force and gravity and work. And he knew that he wasn't working enough turning that in order to lift all that weight. And then the force, that was drawing it all together. So my dad was a big wig over at Standard Steel. He designed all the plate girder machines, build the plate girders, automatic machines to build bridges and skyscrapers. And he was a field engineer on skyscraper projects. He had met John Lincoln, the founder of Lincoln Electric Welders, and he had written several books on welding, and my dad had a library of them signed by John Lincoln. But when I was young, he was teaching me how to weld up an oil tank one time, and while he was teaching me, he was telling me, the properties of electricity in the weld, and he says, well, it has 4 forces. And then he checked himself. He said, well, it has more forces than that, but we don't know how to control them, so we don't worry about them. They're just small forces. So over here at Ed's Workstation, they got everything labeled for you, so you won't think about what it is. They're just going to tell you what it is. And they have this label, it is a generator, but it's not. It's a magnet vacuum is what it is. He built this out of old engine block, just to have a good stand with bearings on it. And so where the crankshaft come out the back and bolted up to the flywheel, he took all these old Model T magnets, come from the old stator on the charging circuit, took them off a whole bunch of cars and lined them up. I think there's 24 ends, and he put the 2 norths, 2 souths together and stacked them up, I think 6 tall, and bolted all this together and then concreted it all together. And you can see he's got a big flanged pipe. I guess that the flange was to bolt it up to a water line so it could be sunk in the ground, jetted in. And so I imagine this is a pretty deep ground he's got set up. So as he says in his book of Animal, Vegetable, and Mineral, everything has magnets in it, and that's what causes gravity. And so in order to suck all these magnets out like a vacuum bag, in order to get the magnets out of you, you would have to let your outer shell, vacuum up, to vacuum all the magnets out. And so he figures, when you vacuum all out, they have to go somewhere. And so he runs this reverse, he pumps all the magnets from the chains into the ground, or he pumps all the magnets from the ground into the chain. It's a 2-way pump. And what you're looking at up here is all stored energy. And then he had many of these, what looked like ancient radio tuners around the shop. And it's hard to find any information on it. It all was disappearing. But back in the day, there were some kids that said they saw him levitating stones. And he was holding 2 cones in his hand. You can see it in this old ancient dendra carving. You see this man holding these 2 cones, and it's like he's got a ground strap running down him so he don't get electrocuted. And he's making light, to make it light and to make it light, not heavy. You see the light has got a cord running too. So John Hutchison, he'd been working on experiments to create levitation for a long time, and he come out with a lot of results. But he's trying to do everything with radio frequency. But it seems first, if you find the correct frequency, then try to put it in a radio signal. You know, he says he doesn't understand. He says he's getting better at finding the frequency to make things levitate. And you can find some of his videos around that show him levitating some stuff. But maybe you don't need a radio frequency to break in. Maybe you could just lay some grease and put a couple probes on each end of your rock and vacuum all the magnets out of it. And as to this jed pillar that's holding this light up here, you know, there's other pictures of this jed pillar. You know, where the pharaoh and the god have it tilted. And if you measure this tilt compared to these squared up lines around here, you'll see it's the same tilt as the Earth's axis. You know, they're trying to give you a little clue here. And Ed talks about this, where he takes a 3-foot long bar magnet and hangs it by a string. And depending on the place on Earth, you know, toward the equator and past it, the balance of that string on that magnet will have to move. The balance moves. And it has to do with the magnetic field of the Earth, that you'll have to move this string back and forth depending on where you're at. I saw this when I was just a little kid on In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. It was pretty fascinating. And they'll try to shut down all the hocus pocus about this, saying that Ed had a tripod that he lifted all this with. But you can see the tripod's not tall enough. You know, the bottom blocks here and the top blocks here, you only got 8-10 feet in here that you can lift this stone. And the higher you lift it, the harder it is to sway it. It's probably fairly difficult to move it sideways. You know, this lifts it up and down, but it doesn't move it sideways. He would have to keep taking this down and resetting it a couple feet and dragging that block. And then when he gets to where he's going to set the block at, he's got to raise it up that high and then swing it sideways. He has to set up more winches somewhere, and it's going to turn his tripod over. It's just not going to work when you jack something to the top and try swaying it sideways. This tripod is just laying on the ground. But on the top of this tripod was a box that was doing the work. Ed found a natural frequency to align all the magnets in the stone. And once they're all aligned, they're all turning the same direction. And then if you use torsion, and he explains more about that in his book. But it's just the torsion of two magnetic forces. You know, one of them's already in the earth, and one of them you adjust in the stone. And this stone he's working with, it's a coral stone. You know, it's mostly calcium. It's just all ancient coral and sea animals dead on the bottom. And down here at Homestead, you know, it's when the hurricane come through, all the trees blowed over. It showed this perfect flat stone underneath, and because all that part of Florida was once just a coral reef underwater, so this is all flat area, and just 8 to 10 inches, you know, under the soil, you see this stone everywhere. It's real porous. You know, a coral stone is just a calcium carbonate, which are both better conductors than copper. And no, I didn't misspeak there. While calcium is a poorer conductor of electricity than copper or aluminum by volume, it is better conductor by mass than both due to its very low density. So pound for pound, it's a better conductor than copper or aluminum. So it would be easy to pump a bunch of extra magnets in it, or to vacuum them out, and would be easier to levitate. It wouldn't take as many because it's lighter. So the trick is, put the wire pretty close to the center of your nuts, and they don't have to be all in place. You watch when the arc hits the nuts will draw up. I'm going to build a little table that'll rotate so I can direct these nuts in different directions when I charge them. And I'm going to go hook up to my weld machines so I can control the flow of electricity and the current and cycles better. And they try to shut all this down as pseudoscience and free energy nuts. But the most educated people on the subject will tell you that there's forces that we don't understand. We don't know how to control them. But my next movie is going to be on this Exodus 31. I was looking at this cut of his and I ran into this. And this is just going to prove that they'll lie to you about everything. But after I had read that bottom, I pretty much got it. And so I went up to the top. It usually helped me read the top. And I read down here to line 11, the end of this poem. And it says, that I have commanded you that you shall do. And it made me laugh for a while when I read this, because the word they shall do is yessa. Yessa massa. That's where that comes from. We used to watch it in old movies. The old black slave or the hired help. You know, he was yessa. Yessa. And so that means they shall do. When the captain tells you to do something, you say yessa, and that's what that means. I'll do it. I will do. And so people that didn't understood this, they might have read this as yessa, but it's yod to make as to. Make as to. And so the captain gives you an order, you know, make way. And yessa, I'll make as to. And it's, you know, make as connected, you know, as you said it would be, as you has commanded, that I shall do. I make as to. But, yeah, this was all ripping on the Vatican and on the priest. And it gave me a better idea of what this altar means. You know, it's called Beazel and Holy Ob, the craftsman. But the Beazel, you know, this is the basil is the circle around the outside of your watch that turns around the outside of the compass. And so it's in the easel is what it says. And it's in the easel of El, of God. And so it's where God painted the heavens is what this means. In easel of God. And this O Holy Ab, you know, the O is of the Holy. AB is Father. In the easel of God and the Holy Father, of the Holy Father. And the whole thing tells a whole total different story, all the way down to Moses is not Moses. And you'll see when it talks about the tribe of Judah, that's not what it says. It's of the math you would. You know, the mathematicals were the astrologers, and you would is the judicial astrology of the math of you would. Judicial astrology. And it gave me a better idea of what the Vatican means. And you can see it's got lines that's talking about the vat of the Hub's maze, Bach of the holy, and this is a real word for holy. They got changed up there. And the Vatical clue, the Vatical eki where, here where, and the Vatican. You know, the con is the base down. You should say the con is the priest, but the Vatican, the Vatican. And so the Vatican is just a misreading because they didn't want people to know this meant read it backwards, but it's the vat when can to, and the base. Its base, you know, is the vat can. But it's pretty good. It ought to get you laughing. It got me laughing pretty hard when I got to the end of it. And so I didn't even read the middle of it yet. I just I read the last line, and that caused me to go up to the first line. But it's teaching how to read all of this ancient Christian art and telling you, what to pay attention to and what to null out, what's just there to be there. And for anybody who looked back here and seen all these weeds, that's your dogma that calls those weeds. That's what the city man come out and told me the other day. I need to cut all them weeds. Those aren't weeds. That's a front door blackberry patch. And that's not an old cooler sitting on the ground. That's where the home of my snake who guards my blackberries from all them rodents. And no, I don't clean that up till after blackberry season.
Don't forget, hurry, I won't forget.
Alright, I'm gonna cut this off here. Good day.